There is a graveyard that car manufacturers don't talk about. Perfectly functional models quietly retired every year. Because if they kept selling them cheaper, no one would buy the new ones. It makes business sense. But video games have the same problem, and they can't solve it the same way. Old games don't disappear. The good ones just wait, and sometimes they come back stronger than whatever replaced them. That's experience I had recently happened to me. Some games age in the opposite direction, their art styles growing more distinctive and appreciated with time. Their graphics consistent and intentional in a way that still holds value today. And underneath that, lean optimized engines built in an era where there was simply no room for inefficiency. No hundreds of gigabytes of discontinued project files barely held together. No engine stretched beyond its limits by poor planning. No matter how powerful your modern hardware is, it cannot iron out the foundational mistakes of a bloated, poorly optimized game. The old ones were built tight because they had to be. Video games have a problem that most industries would envy and most developers seem to ignore entirely. Old titles actively compete with the new ones. When a new game releases in an established genre, it isn't just competing against its contemporary rivals. It's competing against every well-regarded game that came before it in that same space. The standards were already set, the bar was already placed. And the new release that fails to clear it doesn't just disappoint in isolation. It sends players back to the titles that set the bar in the first place. The effect is almost paradoxical. A mediocre new release in a beloved genre can inadvertently resurrect the very games it was supposed to replace. Something akin to the Streisand effect. The attempt to move attention forward accidentally directs it backward. Instead of sales momentum building around the new title, an old title quietly climbs the charts again, rediscovered by people who needed a reminder of what the genre was capable of. Most developers don't factor this into their thinking. They map their competition horizontally across current releases and completely miss the vertical competition stretching back decades beneath them. Recent Bethesda work brings Starfield immediately to mind. I should say upfront that I'm not Bethesda's biggest fan, but their older Fallout titles hold a special place. The creativity and absolute silliness you can achieve through the RPG system in those games is genuinely impressive. Certain stat combinations don't scale well into the late game, don't really work the way you'd hope, but somehow that barely matters. You hit a wall, get momentarily disappointed, find the next ridiculous combination available to you, and the game pulls you back in. There is a generosity to that design that's hard not to appreciate. I could digress considerably talking about Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls series, but that deserves its own conversation entirely. The point here is Starfield and what it represents as Bethesda's most ambitious and most revealing recent release. Saying Starfield was disappointing feels like an understatement to anyone who followed its development with genuine hope. But disappointment alone isn't the most interesting thing about it. One association I always return to with Bethesda games is their modding community. These people deserve considerably more recognition than they receive. Not just the modders themselves, but the team at Nexus Mods who built the infrastructure that makes it all possible. It's a genuinely remarkable community. Which brings us to Aristotle's concept of telos, the idea that everything has an inherent purpose, a final cause, a state of full realization it is naturally moving toward. Applied to video games, this becomes a surprisingly useful lens. A game at launch is rarely its complete self. Patches improve it, updates refine it, and in Bethesda's case, the modding community does something even more profound. it continues the journey toward what the game was always trying to become. The developers put down their tools and the community picked them up. In a strange way, modders are the most Aristotelian force in gaming. They look at unfinished thing and ask what it was supposed to be, and then they try to get it there. As a sci-fi game built around space exploration, Starfield should have scratched that particular itch. Instead, it sent me to Nexus Mods out of curiosity, and what I found there surprised me considerably. Not Starfield mods, or at least not ones worth writing home about yet. What I found was an abundance of mods for the Mass Effect original trilogy, now thankfully compiled as the Legendary Edition. That discovery reignited something. If the new sci-fi adventure couldn't deliver, why not return to Shepard and the galaxy worth saving? But the mods deserve their own moment. What community has done with Mass Effect Legendary Edition goes far beyond quality of life improvements. Recovered files reintegrated into the game as finished missions. Lost voice line options restored from audio files that survived in the original game's data. And perhaps most significantly, a complete overhaul of Mass Effect 3's ending, rebuilt to actually honor the RPG promise that Mass Effect 1 and 2 made. The idea that your choices, your work, your relationships would mean something concrete in the end. The developers left things unfinished. The community found the pieces and completed them. Telos in action. One thing that always sat uneasily with me about Mass Effect 3 beyond the ending was the overall vibe of the game. A persistent sense that something fundamental had shifted. Audemo's Happy Ending mod addressed the ending directly and genuinely got the experience back on track, restoring that sense of earned accomplishment rather than inevitable sacrifice the original conclusion left you with. The Diversification mod added countless small details that made the world feel more alive and believable. But it was the Tain Lives and Kelly Returns mods that revealed the bigger fumble. Mass Effect 3's story moves in a defensible direction, whole planets falling to Reaper control, a losing fight against an overwhelming force. That darkness is fine. What went missing is something more specific and more damaging: Shepard's ability to meaningfully influence the events surrounding them. Think about what the first two games actually sold to you. Paragon or Renegade both told the story of someone who protected their crew first and the galaxy second. Even a brutal renegade Shepard took care of the people around them, not just out of strategy because the writing made you believe it mattered. The illusion was constructed so carefully you never questioned it. The cracks were always there if you looked. A certain Paragon decisions that are simply common sense. Renegade options that tip from brutal into juvenile, and the Geth decision on Legion's loyalty mission that is somehow more confusing in later events than it should be. But the writing carried you past those inconsistencies. Even the child Shepard sees was so elegantly reconstructed with Dreams Remade mod. Suddenly the whole child thing didn't annoy me anymore. Mass Effect 3 couldn't sustain that same illusion, and the mods reveal exactly where the cracks are by fixing them one at a time. Most of Mass Effect 3's decisions are at least well-intentioned even where execution falls short. I don't object to characters lost in action when the story earns it. The Vermeer mission is one I genuinely admire for exactly that reason. But Tain's death feels like a concept that never got the development time it deserved. If his passing was meaningful after his exchange with Kai Lang, going out on his own terms, it would have been earned and believable. Instead, it lands with a hollow thud, particularly for a female Shepard if she romanced him. The mod that keeps Tain alive doesn't just fix a sentimental loose end. It restores something more fundamental. The sense that Shepard's relationships and influence actually mean something. A commander who saved or shaped the lives of so many crew members suddenly having no option, no play, no way to even try for an old friend? And Thane's sacrifice not even meaningfully damaging Kai Lang or Cerberus in return. It wastes a genuinely great character. The contrast with what Mass Effect does at its best makes this sting more. The suicide mission on the Collector's base, the Battle of Ilos, the battle for the Citadel. These moments made you feel like every decision you'd made was load-bearing, that Shepard's presence at the critical time was the difference between survival and a collapse. Mass Effect 3 in its original state quietly dismantled that feeling, and the fingerprints of EA's acquisition and BioWare's time constraints are visible in almost every place the illusion breaks down. The shining exceptions are missions on Rannoch and Tuchanka. Both feel like the game Mass Effect 3 was supposed to be throughout. What surprised me most on this replay was the combat. I always held Mass Effect 2 as the golden standard, hoped other games could match it. But playing Vanguard in Mass Effect 3 for the first time, with mod additions, restoring crew members and weapons, gave me a genuine reality check. The combat system is objectively superior to Mass Effect 2. I simply hadn't been able to appreciate it before because the emotional atmosphere had been dragging me under the entire time. Losing crew members with story that felt unearned, their absence barely registering on the larger story. It created a persistent sadness that colored everything, including the systems I would have loved under different circumstances. Sometimes a game's emotional failures cost it credit it genuinely deserved elsewhere. So, who deserves the credit for one of the best gaming experiences I've had in recent memory? A complete revisit to one of the greatest trilogies in video game history. Bethesda? Not because Starfield delivered, precisely because it didn't. Starfield reminded me that a far superior experience was already sitting in my library waiting to be rediscovered. And for that, Todd Howard has my genuine, if slightly reluctant, gratitude. To every modder on Nexus Mods who contributed to this experience, thank you, sincerely. My conservative estimate is that the combined mods across all three games added somewhere between 40 and 50% additional gameplay to my runs. I did 2 playthroughs on Insanity, did full achievement completion for the first time. Experiences I wouldn't have had without the work of people who loved this trilogy enough to finish what BioWare left incomplete. There is something quietly profound about that. The car graveyard problem of video games turns out to have an unexpected silver lining. Old games don't rust, don't get scrapped, and with the right community around them, they don't just survive, they get completed, they find their Telos. Sometimes it just takes a disappointing new release to remind you where the real experience was all along. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Hit a like and subscribe for similar topics, and I will talk to you in the next video. Until next time, take care.